I'm Claudine Wong, joining you from the San Francisco Bay Area, and I'm joined now by Tori Campbell, who's coming to us from Singapore. The Tori,
Hello.
longtime journalist who is now at
Mm-hmm.
Good News, which is a podcast
Mm-hmm.
where you put all the world's events in a format that is good for children to listen to and their families. So you're always very busy. How are you doing?
Yeah. Well, we're doing great. We're just starting to experience your world right now because we are now in day 2 of lockdown. We have, though, been kind of under partial lockdown basically since end of January. I mean, that steps have been in place here in Singapore to try and limit the spread of coronavirus because it's so close to China. And so initially in end of January, they limited people coming in from China. And there were a few other, limitations in place. You got your temperature taken. I had to give my name and phone number when I went into places so they could do contact tracing. And it was well under control initially, but in early March, when it really started spreading around the world and people were coming in from Australia, Europe, North America, it really took off. So they now have decided, you know what, we're just going to have full lockdown. Yeah, for 28 days. So, 2 incubation cycles. So we are now in day 2. So ask me in a couple weeks
how you're doing. I know. Well, it's interesting because I know, Singapore got so much press for doing it the right way. Like, let's be like Singapore. And there was a question of whether culturally Americans could jump into that in the way they have done in Singapore because they had been through SARS, because they had already kind of implemented these things in place. And it was easy to see people kind of drop back into it, understanding the safety, understanding, that education had already gone on about it. How disappointing was it? And I mean, because it's disappointing when I watch, because you want to see success stories. You want to see places where it's happening the way, because it gives us hope. You going to a second lockdown is a little bit discouraging for me, from my perspective.
Yeah, and I think the government tried so hard to not do this lockdown. I mean, they really tried to keep businesses open. We were still at restaurants. Gyms were still open, but you only have 9-10 people in a class. Sanitizing everywhere, temperature taking. But it just got to the point where they just couldn't do it anymore. It just kept spreading. So they finally said, okay, we're going to have to, implement this full lockdown at the moment. But there's still a sense of, it's interesting, a sense of trust and faith in the government. The government said, there's no need to hoard food. We have plenty of supplies. So they did implement, you can't buy more than 4 of one item at a time. So there's still plenty of toilet paper here, I'm happy to say.
That's good.
There are a few shortages. There are a few shortages in the shelves. I can't find canned beans anywhere. People couldn't find yellow onions for a while, but then you go back and like, oh, look, there's beans and there's onions. So, so it kind of comes in waves. So you just buy what you can find at the time.
Yeah. Sometimes that people get better at it, right? They get better. They're used to it. Okay. Let me share some of this video that you sent my way to give people an idea. And so tell us what we're looking at in terms of some of these pictures and how life has really changed there.
Yeah. So the first, so some of these, this is Haji Lane, which is a really, really popular street, which would normally be filled with tourists in the Arab Quarter, and it's obviously completely empty. That's actually the friend of my son's friend who's in quarantine at a hotel. He came back from New York last week. And so the government is putting everyone up in hotels. They're paying for the hotels, paying for 3 meals a day. So my son goes to visit him and they wave from each other, wave to each other.
It looks like they're recording each other, right?
I know. So obviously this, Marina Bay Sands, hotel there in the distance, normally super packed space,
Is that the one with the swimming pool that we saw in Crazy Rich Asians? Yeah. So
up at the top. Yeah. So that's such an iconic view, and and you would normally have so many people there, and just a few out and about at the moment. So it's a really, such a different sense. And I know it's the same in San Francisco and, London and LA, kind of all over the world.
I'm assuming that's a family, Tori. So, and a gentleman over to people still out in small ways.
Yeah. So my husband and I went out yesterday just to run an errand, and I was wearing a mask, which a lot more people are doing, as you are obviously in the U.S. It's recommended there. But you cannot go for a walk with someone who's not an immediate family member. If you do go out, you get your temperature taken, as you see here. Just because you want to make sure that just in case someone is not feeling well, that they can get traced and
So,
identified by the government.
So it's interesting that you mentioned masks. You see a couple of the people here not wearing them. Is it optional, or do they really stop you if you're not wearing one?
No, it's optional, but the government is providing masks for everybody. We're getting some sent to us here in our apartment. I mean, I deliver down in our box. So, but not the surgical N95, but just a cloth mask, just to prevent breathing. Again, with the concern that there may be people who have it but have no symptoms, asymptomatic, and could be spreading it.
And so another, really famous kind of look, if people have been to Singapore and places that they would like. I mean, normally I would imagine that's a very busy
Yeah,
place.
that's the Merlion, which is opposite the Marina Bay Sands, and that's the symbol of Singapore. Singapura is Malaysian for Lion City. So that statue is the head of a lion and the body of a mermaid. It's obviously an island surrounded by water, so that's why they came up with this famous symbol, fountain. And there's the Central Business District (CBD) behind. So it's a really iconic landmark basically for Singapore. So that's me getting my temperature taken.
They give you a little smiley face?
Museum. Yes, they give you a little sticker to, assure you that you everyone that you've had your temperature taken, and you also have to, take a QR code with your camera and then fill out a survey, and again, ask you where you've been traveling, have you been around anybody with coronavirus, and then you give your name and your phone number, because they're still doing contact tracing, which has been really important.
Was it hard for you to get used to this? I mean, you're smiling there good naturedly. I mean, but was it something to get used to?
Yeah, and that's my son waving at his friend who was in quarantine.
So that's the other picture with his friend, right? Yeah, it's awesome.
Right. Yeah, exactly. No, it was. I mean, I thanked people for doing it. And when I was still going to the church, when church was open, and I said, I appreciate you doing this, and they said, well, thank you for saying that, because some people are really annoyed by it. But I'm like, this is good. This is trying to keep us all safe. It's a good thing. And there have been clusters at churches or at offices, and so it's been really important for the government to be able to follow the people who are having this coming down with it, and then being able to reach out and say, you've been in touch or in contact with someone who's had it, and you better stay shelter in place or self quarantine to prevent it from spreading.
Yeah, I wonder, I was wondering that because Singapore has gotten so much credit for, we're used to this, we know how to do this. I think in week 3 and week 4 of shelter in place, I feel a little grumpier. And I was at Costco just the other day, and some people were very kind, some people were very tense. I mean, I think it's just now as the days progressed, it just gets harder for everyday life. And so the second quarantine, I would think you'd drop into the grumpy phase a little bit faster.
No, you would, it's definitely, but I think you're right that people are used to it here. I mean, I think that the SARS and the MERS experience from, 10, 15 years ago, people understand the importance of sheltering in place. And this is the MRT, which is like their BART or subway, which again, this was yesterday completely empty, when normally this would be jam-packed with people.
And BART in the Bay Area just has really cut down service. I mean, obviously their ridership is low, but also they're trying to get people to not ride if they don't need to. I think on Muni, which is the bus service and all of that. Does everything operate and then people just don't ride it, or have they shut things down in Singapore? Is it hard to get around?
No, there's still public transit. I mean, the MRT is running, the buses are running, but not quite as frequently, like maybe every 5 minutes instead of every 2 minutes. Public transit is a big sense of pride here. We don't have a car, for example. So we, use public transit as well as, a taxi. They still have taxis, but the taxi drivers are telling us, business is terrible. This guy who gave us a ride yesterday back from the store said, normally I think he only had 8 rides that day. He normally has like 4 times that much. So, it's really impacting business, but they're still providing public transit if you need it.
Right. I'm assuming the sign says something.
Well, it said COVID-18 up at the top, and then all the, this is outside a medical clinic. So yeah, so there was a sign in English and a sign in Mandarin. So there's 4 languages here. English is one of them, Mandarin, Malay, and Tamil. And this is at the grocery store, and it kind of cracked me up. It looks like even the bottles for self-distancing, social distancing.
That is funny. Yeah, I looked at that picture when you sent it, and I'm like, what is happening in this photo?
And they have, you can see a little bit of red tape on the floor, so they have all the tapes to stand. And there was a picture earlier where they had tape on one of the stools at the hawker centers, which are like the food courts.
Yeah, let's see if we can find that one. That's interesting too. I mean, I think we're seeing that in grocery stores. I wonder they're modeling it after where it's been done before, and how they know, certain, just to give people a better roadmap, I would say, because as they keep changing this, it is one of those things where, when I'd gone into Costco just yesterday, I hadn't been in many, well, I wouldn't say many weeks, but 2 weeks. And during this pandemic, within 2 days, things changed dramatically. And what is, normal, or what was how it used to be, isn't normal. So this QR code, you mentioned that before.
Yeah. Right. So this is a common thing. I mean, you'd 3 or 4 times a day, before we went to full lockdown. And most times when I wanted to go inside a building, I would need to, snap a picture of that with my phone and fill out, the survey. So,
so that's how they just know. So if you came down with a positive test, they would just go back into all your data and say, this is all the places that, and these are all the same people who were in that same place. I wonder if that, I could see a lot of people in America saying, that's Big Brother. I'm not telling you where I'm going. I mean, you don't get to know that about my activities.
Well, what's so interesting here, Claudine, not only that, but there is an app that you can sign up. It's optional, but you can have the government, if you sign up with this app on your phone, the government can trace your every step and can let you know when you have been in contact with someone when you have been close to someone who has it. And a lot of Westerners are uncomfortable with that idea because it's very Big Brother. They're following you. But a lot of people here, even Westerners, are okay because they said, I would rather give up a little bit of privacy for my safety.
As long as it's a choice, I guess, right? The QR code isn't a choice, though?
No. Well, it's a choice to go in the store.
Okay, I guess you could decide not to go in.
If you want to go in the store, if you don't want to go in the store, then you don't have to go in the store. But you need to fill in this form to go in the store, or go in the church, or go in the building, or or that type of thing. Yeah.
So in this picture, it's interesting. One, I don't like. It's funny because now I'm studying, a generalized picture more than I would ever have studied it before. Like, in this coronavirus world we're living in, I'm like, don't touch your face. And don't touch your face, and wearing your masks. And are you guys far enough away? But are people, I mean, there is some space in between the people who are waiting and walking.
Yeah, because normally at that crosswalk, that's a pretty busy crosswalk on Orchard Road, just down the street from us. And you would have people jammed at, at that crosswalk waiting. And it is interesting seeing everyone spread apart. And this was before the full lockdown went into effect Tuesday. So this was, I think, taken on Sunday, which is normally a very busy day, where there's tons of people out. So it was noticeable, the lack of people, even before the full lockdown went into effect.
And it seems maybe people wanted to take their masks off and then decided to maybe put them back on, once the lockdown's in place, because that does change the way you look at things. And this picture, what are we?
So that's some fish that are in the Singapore River that you normally don't see. So, there are tourist boats that go around the river that obviously aren't working right now. So I think you are seeing more fish and more wildlife here. We have the Botanic Gardens, which isn't too far from us, which is kind of like Central Park. I mean, it's beautiful gardens, and there's actually been quite a few people in there, but you all kind of stay away from each other. You don't cluster around. And I've seen these enormous lizards crawling around. I mean, it's kind of cool.
I think you said that about Venice too, right? Now that people are going, that the water is clear and you can see a lot of things that you don't see. This is the picture you were referencing earlier that we finally got to. The blue tip means don't sit on that. One person sits over here and no one gets to sit there, and then you have space.
Right. And this was when, the food courts and restaurants were still open, but you had to social distance. So, and so we went out for dinner a couple times in the last weeks when restaurants were still open. We had to sit like, have an empty chair between us, with a friend. And we were on a ferry and, they wanted my husband and I to sit, 2 chairs apart. I'm like, I live with this guy. Like, if he has it, I've got it already.
Yeah,
Like,
you
that's
have
not
it,
going to be
but
a problem.
that's a different,
Yeah.
has it been hard for you to get used to it?
Um, yeah, I mean, it's definitely an adjustment, but it's so minor compared to, what other people are having to go through. And something that, you realize you need to do, in order to be able to have the safety of everybody, of the whole community.
Right.
It's something that, that it's our new reality.
So you're the journalist, and what is the story? What is the story that you pull out of this second lockdown that, that tells people in the world, yes, is the storyline, you know, you should be very concerned it's back, and we thought we had stopped it? Or is the story, this is the new reality, maybe, that we may be entering in and out of lockdowns? Because I think that's what people are saying here. What does summer look like? How do we get back to life as normal? And will it ever look the same?
Yeah, I think the story is that you can't be complacent. You can't think it's one and done, that this virus is relentless. And until we get a vaccine, it's not going to be fully,
Yeah, we're not going to
we're not going
feel
to
the
have it fully
same.
mastered. Yeah, yeah.
Are you do you have different habits? I keep saying, I'm like, we're going to have these same habits even when this is done, because I think the cases of flu or cold or just the different bacteria and viruses that make their way around normally, separate from COVID-19, we're better equipped to fight against them because we have better habits.
Yeah, no, I have a yellow sticky inside the elevator when you come into our apartment. Wash hands. And so we have a little powder room, and so as soon as we come in the apartment, we have to go wash our hands. I've gotten, extra supply of hand soap. We have extra sanitizer. They actually were giving away free sanitizer about 10 days ago. So we sent my son down to go pick some up. So again, the government's trying to do what they can to encourage people, and handing out masks.
Yeah.
And it was like the U.S. I mean, in the first phase, they were telling people not to wear masks unless you were sick. But now, and people were following that. But now they're saying, you know what? Because there's so many people who are asymptomatic, everyone should wear a mask, and most people are.
Did most people have them though? Like for me, I had a neighbor who was giving some out, and I'm like, ooh, I will take one, because I just, some people had some extra masks, from when the wildfires hit in the Bay Area and the air quality was bad. But as a general rule, people just don't have these laying around the house. And so a lot of the education around here is how you can make one out of very simple things at home, and put a couple rubber bands around a handkerchief, and yeah, you've got a mask. Is
Right.
it fairly common for people in Singapore to say, oh, it's time for our mask, let's just pull one out?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in many places in Asia, it was a lot more common to see people wearing masks, well before COVID, but I think that was a remnant of SARS and MERS. And again, air pollution, there's been poor air quality here. Periodically, they burn palm fires over in Indonesia, and the smoke drifts over to Singapore. So we've had a couple days where there's been very poor air quality. So we did have some masks as a result. And we needed to bring some when we went to India, because there was pretty poor air quality there. So.
But in general, do you feel a sense in Singapore that there is calm or fear? Or, because I think that's the what we're trying to gauge in people are saying sometimes here, people aren't concerned enough, or they're overly concerned, or the more we shelter in place. I've got to tell you, when I was still going into the station, I think I was less paranoid, because I was just kind of in pseudo normal life. Now that I'm sheltering in place and I'm working from home, and I even going to the grocery store makes me super nervous now.
Yeah. Yeah, I think people are, for the most part, calm here. Like I said, I think there's, quite a bit of faith in the government that, that they're doing a good job. The hospitals are well supplied and well staffed. So there's lots of tests. They've, had plenty of tests for people if you need it. So
have you taken
yeah,
one?
I have not. I have not. Though it's interesting, actually, my husband, I think we might have had it because he came back from China in late December, not feeling well. And he said on this plane from Shanghai, he said everyone was coughing.
Oh,
And
interesting.
so he came back not feeling well and then we went to Vietnam for vacation, and a couple days later I didn't feel well, and I remember it wasn't like a regular cold, but I remember having a headache, a cough, a fever, aches. It lasted for a few days, and then I
Wow.
felt better. So I don't know. I mean, whether we had or not. So I'm really curious. I would love to have a test where you find out if you've had it or if you have the antibodies
Right.
for it.
I think
And
a
yeah,
lot of
I
people
know
get
that's in the
that
works.
test, right? Yeah. I
Yeah,
mean, I think everyone's analyzing their December and their January, and
right.
anytime they didn't feel well. I mean, you obviously are in a place where, especially with the travel, that the likelihood of exposure was, I think, pretty high.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, so I'm sure we're not alone. 'Cause obviously, we had no idea, that
Yeah.
this COVID-19 was happening in December. It didn't really get on the radar until January, and like I said, Singapore kind of jumped right on it. And I think there's a lot of confidence that Singapore is still handling it well. I mean, it's just unfortunate that we've had this second surge of it, and kind of like I think the U.S. we're kind of curious. Well, how do we get out of it? What happens when these 28 days are up, and if the cases plateau, how do you resume to normal? I don't think you could just jump back in 100% to everything is wide open, but I'm guessing maybe we will ease back in and go back up to social distancing, 6 feet apart, and social gatherings of no more than 10 people, and just try to limit it that way.
Well, I think the discussion's interesting because I think we are looking at the countries who are ahead of us. People in the US are looking at the states who are ahead of them. Everyone's trying to get some indication. And certainly with Singapore, it seems with everything that you already have in place there with the QR codes and these apps that can tell you about possible exposure, if Singapore can't get back to a regular, somewhat normal life, then
Hmm.
it doesn't necessarily bode well for the rest of us.
Right, right. And Singapore is such a small city state. I mean, there's only five and a
Right.
half million, so it's a little bigger than LA. So it's very contained. So it's hard to, compare apples to, oranges with
Yes.
the US. So big, and so many people. But
Right, but it
yeah,
should be
so
easier to
Singapore
contain
has
it,
an
right?
advantage.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
theoretically, you
Yeah.
guys should be able to be in a place. Uh, well,
Yeah,
I,
I know.
it's a lot. It's a lot. But you know what?
Crossed.
I am glad that you are healthy and well,
Yeah,
and I'm certainly
thank you.
glad that this gave us a chance to talk and really give us an inside
Yeah.
look at life there, because a second lockdown, that is new. It is
Yeah.
new, and it may be what, as we all look for the dates where we are told maybe you can not shelter in place anymore. I mean, certainly we should all
Right.
be learning from what's happening across the globe. So,
Yeah. 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 No, I think
well,
that's good.
Tori Campbell, thank you so much from
Oh,
across the world joining us to talk
yes.
about this. Your perspective is great and interesting, and
Thank you.
it's so much to learn as we look forward. All right,
Yeah.
and
Well, yeah. Thank you, Claudine. It's been great to talk with you too.
yes, and if you want more information, you can go to coronavirusnow.com. Thanks so much for joining us.